So the watchman in one hour had become as I was. Look at how evolved we've become as an organization in terms of the functions that we have, the number of businesses that we operate, and the scale at which we operate. The one good thing is the speed at which we operate hasn't changed. You have a person who is driven and is capable of whiteboarding, imagining a solution, and not just stop there, but to take it to the execution. That's the perfect thing.
Hello and welcome to Talking Heads. This is Delhivery's first podcast series where we talk to leaders and get to know more about them. On today's episode, we have Arun Bagavathi, the SVP of Network Design at Delhivery. Hi Arun, how are you doing?
Thank you for having me. I will do good cuts.
Great. So Arun, we just wanted to start off by, the question of your journey. Can you tell us about where you grew up, what shaped your early interests, and how did your journey from engineering to business management lead you to Delhivery?
Okay. So I basically grew up in the city of Chennai, studied all along in the same city, went for engineering there the first 21 years. After engineering, like most people have, at that point in time in my batch, I applied all over the place. So there was MBA, there was MS, we had no idea what any of it meant. And then you took the best out of the choices where you got accepted. So I was an IIM Baldwa, not entirely sure why I was doing an MBA at that point in time. But one thing led to another. I think it was in retrospect, I'm very happy about that decision. And after IIM Bangalore, again, I moved straight into the Tata Group that I spent 6.5 years, roughly. The most part of it selling trucks. And that's the reason why I next moved to Delhivery. Delhivery was, at that point in time, beginning to just set up a surface network. So there was a mutual interest. Interestingly, in IIM Bangalore, we started off the supply chain society, me and a matchmate of, and I had no idea that I would end up in supply chain. There was an interest naturally, it seemed like an interesting subject, but I had moved to other functions after that, mostly sales. So it was quite fortunate and unplanned, the move to back to supply chain. So that's broadly about.
And was there anything about supply chain that sort of interested you or kept you going?
I mean, supply chain is, for me, the comfortable part about it is just numbers, comparing one number to another. It is not trying to understand more difficult, abstract topics like marketing or organizational development. I've never been comfortable with those, to be very honest. So the fact that, this was more about trying to increase the efficiency, optimize. Those were the reasons why I liked the subject, to be very honest.
Right. And right after that, you joined Delhivery, which was almost around a decade ago at this point, more than a decade ago. So, since you've been with Delhivery for more than a decade, obviously the company has grown a lot exponentially in these years. Uh, how do you see Delhivery as an organization and an ecosystem that has evolved over time? Like, what was your experience back when you joined to what it is now?
There is no comparison really. I mean, just look at how evolved we've become as an organization in terms of the functions that we have, the number of businesses that we operate, and the scale at which we operate. The one good thing is the speed at which we operating hasn't changed. That's very hard to maintain for a very large organization, and that's the good part. Somehow we kept that at the core unchanged. But it's a word of difference. I remember, since I was in operations in the initial phases, a head of a last mile for the city, or for that matter, let's say a manager for a hub, I'm not even sure all the hubs were headed by a manager there, also had to develop as the person who finds people for staffing, who does the admin work, the housekeeping. So it was multitasking at scale, and you had to, there was no second team to lean on. If you had a responsibility, it was your entire baby. You had to kind of grow it, nurture it. Today, it's a word of difference. I get at least 100 mails every day. with the subject pre-alert. What a pre-alert is basically at that point in time when a facility used to send a truck to, let's say, the next one, so DC to a hub or a hub to a DC. They had to send a mail saying, I have sent this vehicle, so please make sure you receive it and unload it. Today, our systems are so evolved, our products have scaled so much that somebody who's sitting in a DC has a dashboard and he has visibility of shipments which are already underway the moment it's departed from an upstream facility. So these 100 pre-alert mails that come in while they are not necessary are 100 reminders in a day of how far we've come. So there is no comparison other than the good part, which is that the speed hasn't changed, the hunger to grow hasn't changed, but everything else was different. We were extremely scarce on resources. A lot of the functions, entire functions did not exist at that point in time. So yeah, that's how the journey has been.
And you mentioned you started off with operations when you first joined Delhivery. Could you tell us a bit about your career path within Delhivery?
So like I told you, my mandate was to build the surface thickness. And at that point in time, pretty much all the cities were connected only by, and there was a conscious decision made that this is a product for which there is demand and we need to build this. So I started off with the hubs. The first mile was a separate function in the initial parts. Then I took over the first mile and over a period of time, the last mile. So the transportation operations, as you call it, is what I was looking at for a peak. After that, I moved out of operations, and for a brief period, I was working on, I would say, multifunctional projects, not restricted to any function, for maybe less than a year. And since 2019, if I'm not mistaken, I had moved on to this role, which is just the network design and the tracking operations for these reasons because of my prior experience and network design.
Right. And at what point in this path did the mesh network, which is the unique selling point of Delhivery's network, get introduced?
See, the good part of a lot of us who joined at that point in time is we had no prior experience in supply chain. So we had to learn everything on the job. There was no baggage. There were no predefined templates that you could follow. The second aspect of delivery was the scale at which the company was growing. And while you are growing at scale, maybe 20%, 30%, that cannot be at the cost of customer experience or shipment size department. So we had to figure out a network which could take on that kind of variability, isolate problems, because uncontrollable factors are a matter of life. There is a festival somewhere, there are floods elsewhere, and that will keep happening. But the idea is to have a network which is as resilient as possible and as capable of dealing with variability. So sometime, if I'm not mistaken, this would have been 2018 or 2019. There was more of a whiteboarding exercise at that point in time with Sahil and Rohit, where we were debating how should the hubs connect to each other, what parts of it need to be flexible and variable in order to accommodate this kind of chaos. The second is, I think this predates my joining Delhivery. We had always had this aspiration to have an expected path for a key shipment, which is, let's say this mug has to go from here to Tauru LB, or you can go on like what, kind of in crude terms predicting how this shipment will course through the network. That was like a holy grail that ultimately came true in 21, possibly up 2020 when it went to it. So that's when we decided that we don't have to go with the same template that already exists. Let's build a different network which is dynamic, capable of dealing with fast paced work, and which is resilient to sudden fluctuations, either internal or external. Sale also in operational terms is a huge fluctuation. So that's when the mesh network came about. So yeah, that's how.
And if you had to explain mesh network in layman terms, how do you define it? Describe it actually.
Yeah. So if you think of we are sitting right now in residency now, right? 20 years back or maybe 30 years back in Bangalore, the nature of the bus network was such that there were only two depots. One was the depot which is in Shivajinagar, and the other was the depot which is at Majestic. If you had to travel from any part of the city to another part of the city, you had to go to Majestic and then take a bus back. Yeah. Today, if you open up your phone and let's say from here we have to travel to Rajajinagar, and if you choose public transport, it gives you option 1, option 2, option 3. You can take bus numbers 1 and 2. You can take, or you can take bus numbers 7 and 11. The first choice means you take 43 minutes. The second choice means you take 52 minutes, right? So you have the freedom to essentially decide which combination of routes to take based on your convenience, based on what you find is more comfortable. Now, think of yourself as the shipment. Now, there are so many ways in which the shipment can move in our network from one point to another. But in order to enable that, you need all these interlinkages. You can't have one Shivajinagar depot. And therefore, you can't have one Boskote gateway for all of the southern region. So, if a shipment had to today in a network in real terms travel from, I'm just making this up, but let's say Hubli to Trichy, can go from Hubli to Hyderabad to Chennai to Trichy, can go from Hubli to Bangalore to Trichy. There may be 2 or 3 other combinations which are there. So, in a sense, it is a mesh because the hubs are interconnected. The second aspect is we don't say that every shipment from Hubli to Trichy will necessarily go only through Bangalore. That choice today is done by this EP system which runs in the VAT, which provides that visibility to the hubs. They act on it. And based on the available space in a truck, they keep rerouting parcels there and then. So that is broadly the mesh network.
Right. And over the last decade, trucking has also evolved, right? Enormously. Like you said, you've also worked on trucking. What are some of the biggest shifts that you've witnessed in this industry, even from an external point of view and even within delivery? How do you think it has evolved?
Within delivery, I think the answer is straightforward. I dare say that in express trucking at least, especially with the shift that we have made to different form factor, which are the packer trailers, which we were the first to do it. Even with the alternate fuels, we are amongst the earliest adopters. Prior to that, there was a motion when the surface network started about how trucks cannot operate more than 8,000 or 9,000 kilometers a month. Now that got challenged by a set of transporters who came up at that point in time. I think the major changes are, at least in our application, which is courier, express, parcel, call it what you will. The utilization of trucks has gone through it's multiplied. What that means also is then now the kind of vehicles that you need to sustainably operate day in and day out, that has changed. This has a direct bearing on both improving the speed of trucking and reducing the cost because you're utilizing the asset so much more, which bridges the gap with air and therefore encourages more people to move to surface. As far as the trailers are concerned, our objective has always been simple. How do we make the shipping cheaper for the end customer? And the trailers are just a means to an end. Alternate fuels, I think, are an important path which we should explore because one, it helps us de-risk from being linked to any one fuel or the shocks linked to one fuel. The second is, I think if you read the Ds, there is going to be diversification from diesel, which is inevitable at some point. It's spontaneously happening. There are so many electric three-wheelers and two-wheelers which are coming. This will come to long distance trucking as well. So we are better off understanding the implications of these ordinary fuels in our network upfront, which is why we don't have that.
Yeah. Before we move to the next question, I also wanted to touch upon the peak, right? Because that is one extremely exciting event that happens every single year for the logistics industry. Delivery gears up for that every single year. You have been around for 10 years, so you've obviously seen a lot of different kinds of peaks, right? However, this year's peak was a little different. It was one of the smoothest that we've ever had. What was it? What was the planning behind peak 2025 when it comes to network and tracking as well?
So one was obviously the learnings from each preceding peak, right? In some sense, we figure out how to incorporate that when planning for the next peak. The second is what I was telling or touched upon earlier about how evolved our tech and product system have become. So they have enabled us to protect our network while at the same time handle a significant jump in volumes. This is a capability which we did not have last year, for instance. And the learnings went in. We developed this capability. We started testing it out 3 months before this peak. And in a sense, when we were picking up shipments, we were picking up volumes, we were extremely cognizant of the capacity that is available across the network, especially in the last month. And what are the implications of these volumes for the health of the network? Are there any places which will rupture? Those advanced signals, not to mention the role that the control took place and how much it has evolved from where it used to be. So I think these are the two main reasons why this peak felt very different. But equally, I would like to point out that with every passing year, the speed with which our B2B business is growing, the implication of the peak naturally is going to become less and less pronounced because the B2B business doesn't peak at the same times as the B2C and the heavy businesses do. So we will feel the impact of this less next year for sure compared to what it was this.
And do you have any sort of fun anecdotes to share from the last 10 years that you've been here in terms of how we've evolved? Like something where a particular instance was sort of different in a previous peak or even a non-peak segment for that matter, and how it's
So we'll always go to the first peak that I've been in because that was the craziest. And I think this was Hyderabad, the facility which we had just opened. And very wisely, we decided to open this facility, I think, a week before the peak. We landed up there and our procurement and who used to work with Sunny, we found him in the facility sweeping the floor. Like I said, there were more of, I mean, you had to do everything yourself. If you had to make the facility ready, you had to make the facility ready. But then possibly 20 of us who had landed up from various places because we realized that this facility is going to become a bottleneck. At midnight, somebody asked for tea. There was no tea shop visible for kilometers around. An hour later, we find our watchman from 1 hour back burning parts of wooden pallet outside and making tea. So the watchman in 1 hour had become a Saivas. And after I think 2 days, the night when we had to return to the hotel, which was not very far away, but there was no public transport. We just got one of the carting vehicles that we had. Some 20 of us working in an ST facility got into that. And we reached the hotel lobby. And the guard initially thought we were some workers because we were covered in dust. And he walked up to us and we were going to the reception. And somebody had to tell him to actually stay here. So it was I think every subsequent peak has been later than that. But that is the one story which will always come to about that.
talking about how the network design has been planned in a way, but you're ensuring that every shipment has a different sort of routing, whatever is necessary for it to reach the other point, right? Whatever is efficient. It also sort of also cements the fact that every shipment matters in deliveries network, right? First of all, what does that phrase mean to you? What does every shipment matters mean to you? And also, how is it that your team, or how do you make sure that your team follows this pace as well?
See, the first part is in an operational business, failures are inevitable because a large part of the movement is going to happen outside of your control on the roads, either inside the city when an FE goes out or on the highways. There is also a part of, let's say, in a country like ours, there are everything is with custard, be it a festival, be it an election. So that part is clear. So when we say every shipment matters, at least from a network design standpoint, I think the most important aspect is how do you design it in such a way that it is most resilient to such shocks. And that is how, and this predates, let's say, when the whole dense DC network, as we call it, came up. I, if I'm not mistaken, nobody else had that kind of a dense cluster of DCs. Today we possibly are sitting a few dozen in just Bangalore. Whereas at that point in time, BB people used to operate with 5 or 7. The idea of that dense DC model was also to create a layer of IPCs, which are the layer one level above the DCs. And one of the aspects which was stressed upon when I joined about these IPCs are this is more like a, this is also like a circuit breaker. If there are too much shipments or too many shipments, we need to have a place where we can hold them so that that entire DC doesn't crumble. So this element of thinking on how to prevent failures in the future has always been there, and it continues to be that, like I told you of the mesh report. It is also about when we plan for the future. We have 2 hubs in Bangalore. We have vertical hubs in NCR. It is always a choice. You can have one large facility or you can have redundancy to plan for. I mean, you're planning for a future base, or see that if something happens, something goes wrong, I can always have a fallback option. I think these are 2 examples of how we try to reduce the risk on the network. And that's, if ultimately the reason why you do that is because you're saying even if it is, let's say, a flood in certain part of Karnataka, I can't give that as an excuse to thousands of customers who are nowhere near that flooded area for weeks on it. We'll have to find a way to get around it. So that's this. I mean, that in my mind would be why every shipment matters, and we think of how we think about the shape of that.
Right. Right. And talking about, how, because the network is like also built with these people, right? There's obviously hubs, trucks, everything that is involved, but it's all run by people, right? So you've led teams through multiple evolutions within delivery itself in the last 10 years, right? Through new business lines, product launches, more expansion, network expansion, etc. When it comes to hiring someone for network design specifically, or even trucking for that matter, what are the kind of mindset, skill sets, qualities that you're looking for in a candidate who would like to pursue supply chain?
As a general philosophy, I'd like to always have somebody in my team who I can just tell them this is the end outcome that I would like to see, and they would just do everything else on their end. That is the perfect way to keep yourself distressed. So, I mean, not to put it lightly, but the idea is somebody who can be given an end goal, who can scope it out, create a plan, and go and deliver. No, what that means is you need people who don't just have imagination, but who are also willing to take risks, who have the ability to make mistakes. And for that, you need to create an environment where they feel comfortable making the occasional mistake. But more importantly, when you realize that what you're doing is not right, you need to be able to correct course. Rollback is necessary, right? So you need to be agile, fast, willing to take risks, willing to learn, willing to unlearn. If it's somebody who is from a supply chain background, so that also becomes an important aspect. These are the things that I would look for in general. As far as network design is concerned, it's also a team which is really even it's the team which creates a template or a blueprint. It's in the background. But ultimately, how reliably, consistently we deliver is completely determined by the efficiency of our operations teams who do it. So it also needs to be somebody who can deal with large teams, articulate himself well or herself well. So these are what I would normally look at. And I think maybe not just in this game, but in any team, if you have a person who's driven and is capable of whiteboarding, imagining a solution, and not just stop there, but to take it to the execution, that's the perfect thing.
Yeah. And talking about, let's say, someone does get hired within delivery, right? You yourself went from the role of a director, if I'm not wrong, to SVP or senior director to SVP, I think.
Associate director.
Associate director. So you went from associate director to now a senior vice president.
Then it was a name. Yeah.
Yeah. So for someone who is in delivery right now, who has just started off or who's quite young or new to the company, how would you describe the career growth within this company?
Is entirely up to you. I have seen people move across all kinds of functions in all directions. I have seen people in the same function for 10 years or maybe just a couple like me. I have seen others to move from sales to operations to sales to product. I mean, it's entirely left to the individual. The good part of being an organization which is growing so fast and which is now dealing with so many sub-businesses within logistics is that there's never any dearth of roads. So it's a question of how much you can choose, how much responsibility you're willing to take up. And the very fact that we have so many movements laterally is also an indicator that it is something which is encouraged actively. So in that sense, it's entirely FKD.
All right. And the opportunities are just endless.
Absolutely.
Right. All right. I just have one last question for you. Finally, as the year is coming to the end as well, what are some of the future logistics trends that are exciting you? Like, what is it that you see in the future? This is not about delivery per se, but about just logistics as an industry. What are certain trends when it comes to network and trucking that you're looking forward to explore as well? And when it comes to deliveries network, what is it that you're looking forward to over there as well?
Since you mentioned talking, or even from an airport standpoint, I think this one of the most interesting things, according to me, is the speed at which these new expressways are coming up. Like, actually, in a year from now, we'll have an expressway from here to Chennai, Bangalore to Chennai. Not just that, so the sheer speed at which it is coming up. What that means is that as the utilization of trucks will go up even more. You'll be able to reach destinations faster. The amount of fuel that you consume to reach cover the same distance goes up because the quality of the roads are better. And this is a story which is going to tell. Now, the risky bit here also is that some of the edge that we have is the alternate fuels that I was referring to. The technology is changing so fast that it's very hard to take a decision on a lot of these things. We have a truck which can, let's say, go from Bangalore to Chennai in one charge today, based on today's technology. In 2 years, we may have trucks which can travel from here to Pune on a single charge. I am not talking hypothetically, I'm talking on the basis of announced plans globally, right? So it's hard to understand, but it is inevitable. There is also LNG, huge push by the government. The number of stations which are coming up, how it will behave differently, what it needs for us. These are some of the external factors. One downside is 10 years from now, I think, the reality is in the urban areas of the metro cities, infrastructure is less likely to develop at the pace at which population is going to go up. So if you have today one Bangalore where people complain about traffic, we are possibly going to have 30 cities in 10 years time or 15 years time where the traffic will be terrible. What that means from a neighborhood standpoint is the cost of real estate or even the ability to find real estate is going to become difficult. You will have more cities with entry restrictions. The average speed at which you travel within the city is going to fall lower and lower. So planning the last night is something we'll have to think about. How we do it in light of these increasing restrictions. Don't have any clear answer on that. But that's again something which is going to be testy.
All right. Thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome.
It was great having a conversation with you.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching this episode. Stay tuned for more conversations with leaders within Delhivery. If there's a leader that you'd like to see or questions that you'd like to ask, please write to us in the email below.